Good evening and welcome to the 34th Legislative District Virtual Town Hall with your state lawmakers, Senator Joe Nguyen, Representative Joe Fitzgibbon, and Representative Emily Alvarado. My name is Erin and I'll be your off-camera moderator for this evening. Tonight's event is an opportunity for your state lawmakers to answer your questions about the current legislative session. We sent out a survey earlier this month to gather questions, but you can also ask any questions you have during this live stream in the comments section. With that, let's get started. I'll turn it over to the lawmakers for opening remarks.
How's it going? Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you so much to everybody who is on the stream right now. I am State Senator Joe Nguyen here in the 34th District, and this is the beginning of my second term. So I had the privilege of serving as the chair of the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. I also serve on our Human Services Committee, along with Ways and Means as well. And a lot of the priorities that I have for this coming session deals with addressing the climate crisis, but also ensuring that we invest in people and ensuring that the folks who are most impacted by policies are at the forefront of the decision-making table as well. So it's a privilege. This is our first official town hall together, I think. So that's going to be a fun experience. Obviously, we'll have a bunch more coming up, but we want to make sure that we snuck this in during session as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it off to Representative Fitzgibbon.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Senator. I'm Joe Fitzgibbon. I'm one of your two state representatives, and I am really excited about the work that we're doing this session. I'm in a new role this year. I am now the House Majority Leader, which is a new responsibility for me. I spent a lot of years as the chair of the House Environment and Energy Committee, working to fight climate change, fight toxic pollution, improve our air quality. But now as House Majority Leader, I get to work on the whole array of issues that we are trying to advance in the Washington State Legislature this year. A number of the things that we're very excited about: improving gun safety, preventing gun violence, protecting reproductive freedom, addressing the housing shortage, addressing the workforce shortage, and continuing our progress in the fight against climate change. I think on all of those fronts, we have some good progress to show so far and a lot more to do. And I'm excited to talk with you about that tonight. And I'm excited to introduce my newest colleague, Representative Emily Alvarado.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Your brand new state representative, Emily Alvarado. I'm really glad to be here today and enjoying my first term. I'm serving as vice chair of our housing committee, vice chair of the local government committee, also serving on the capital budget committee. Have my first 8 bills that were introduced, many of which are still moving, addressing issues like fixing our basic needs programs, working to help improve representation for workers, helping to create more affordable homeownership. I'm very proud to be working on big issues that we all care about, like preventing gun violence, reproductive justice, some of the other things that were mentioned. I'm also proud to be joining some wonderful people in the legislature as part of our first Latino caucus at the legislature. I'm the second vice chair as part of our Members of Color caucus in the House, so excited to be working to advance racial equity and equity in our communities as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think with that, we're going to move over to some questions that we received previously, and then also feel free to add some questions in the chat as well, and we'll try to address those. And as a reminder, if we can't get to your questions, we'll put our contact info in the bottom, and we'll reach out after the fact. But with that, we'll hand it back to Erin for some questions.
All right, let's pull up the first one. All right, we're going to start with this one right here. Could you please provide an update on gun safety bills making their way through the legislature?
Sure. So I'll touch on the 2 gun safety bills that have passed out of the House so far, and see if our senator wants to talk about the gun safety bill that's passed the Senate. So in the House, we passed an assault weapons ban. That we know that firearms are now the leading cause of death among children in our country, which is a tragedy. And we are overdue in addressing the epidemic of gun violence. But I think we're on track for the most successful session in state history on protecting Washingtonians, particularly children, from the epidemic of gun violence. So an assault weapons ban, when the federal assault weapons ban was in place for 10 years, mass shooting fatalities were 70% less likely to occur than in the periods before and after. I don't think I have to remind anybody about the frequency with which we're seeing incidents of mass firearm violence in our country right now. So it's very timely for us to be advancing an assault weapons ban to ensure that weapons of war that make committing acts of mass violence very easy, make those much more difficult for people who shouldn't have their hands on firearms to access them. The other bill that we passed out of the House requires a 10-day waiting period and safety training to purchase a firearm. We know not every incident of gun violence, of injury or death by gun is an intentional mass shooting. In some cases, these are accidental deaths that may result from somebody who really didn't know how to handle a firearm, having access to one. And so these two bills that we've moved forward, we think will start to address some of those really avoidable deaths by gun that unfortunately have become way too common in our country.
Yeah, I think what we've done in the Senate at the very least is more address on the manufacturer side. So a lot of what we've seen historically when it comes to tobacco companies, to pharmaceutical companies, where if you have a product that is harming people, you have a fiduciary responsibility to address that harm as well. And the provision that we had coming out of the Senate, which is now in the House, is just ensuring that the manufacturing companies are being held accountable for the products that they're selling that is leading to the loss of life within our communities. And again, if folks are complying, if folks are responsibly using their guns, that's totally fine. In the sense of when it's being used inappropriately and not necessarily for the intended purpose, that's where it comes into effect. So our goal is to protect lives. Our goal is to ensure that we have a safe community for everybody. And that starts with being able to hold some of the folks who are manufacturing accountable for the products that they're selling. And I think you can add it.
Well, I'll just say I was proud to vote on those two bills that Rep. Fitzgibbon talked about when they came to the floor. But also, this is an issue that we're hearing so much about from constituents. I just want to acknowledge that we get so many emails from all of you. I know I've talked to grandmothers from across the 34th who are passionate about making sure that we take action to prevent gun violence. So I was really proud to be able to take those votes and look forward to more bills coming over from the Senate.
Great. Okay, our next question is about abortion. Can I count on your vote to pass Senate Bill 5242? This is the cost sharing for abortion bill on the House floor.
So I already voted for it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's almost too easy.
Yeah, I think it's too easy. I mean, I think for all of us, but I'll just speak for myself. Reproductive justice is a priority, making sure that we have meaningful access to abortion and that it's both legal and safe, and also that there's real access. So part of access is about making sure we eliminate deductibles and we reduce barriers of cost. It's also about making investments to make sure that low-income people and marginalized people are able to access abortion. I was proud to sign on to a letter to help support additional appropriations to make sure that we can support abortion providers in having meaningful access.
And this has been a priority for us for a long time, but I really feel like we were kicked into gear by the Dobbs decision last summer and identified a lot of ways in which our state's protections for reproductive access could be even stronger. Washington needs to be a place that people can come to and safely access abortion, even if it's criminalized in their home state. We know just one state over in Idaho, abortion is now a crime. We need to be sure that Washington is a place that people can come and access that care. And we're doing work on a lot of fronts to make sure that that is not just legally available, but also accessible and affordable.
Okay, so the next question is also about abortion. Will you support funding for the abortion provider workforce and security investments in both the operating and supplemental budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. As I just mentioned, it's certainly a priority for me, and I know for Democrats across the state, and we'll keep pushing to make sure that there's meaningful investments in providing access to abortion, to reproductive care, and to gender-affirming care.
Okay, moving on. The homeless need our help. What is your plan? How can we create a more sustainable situation that works?
Yeah, that's something that we've been tackling over the past few sessions. And obviously with the economics maybe not getting better in Washington State, just overall with some of the layoffs that we've seen as well. I think the biggest thing there is to address that in multiple phases, right? Like there's multiple ways in which folks become unhoused. And that just also means that a response has to be commensurate with that effort as well. And one of the biggest things that we have to do is partner with our local jurisdictions, whether it's Seattle, King County, the state, and the feds all have to chip in to kind of help this crisis because we have to get to the root cause of what's causing this harm to be able to fully address it. The short term, obviously, is getting people shelter and housed, because that's the best way to get them out of the cycle of homelessness. But investing in people, making sure that we have basic needs programs, making sure that we have the behavioral mental health services in place to ensure that folks who may be on the margins don't quite fall over, right? So the prevention piece is just as important as getting folks that are unhoused into housing. But this is something that we're going to have to continue to do. And it spans across multiple efforts, whether it's housing supply, access to healthcare, a workforce that is available to take advantage of the economy that we have as well. There's multiple things that we can do in this space.
Yeah, I'd add that certainly we need to make sure that people who are experiencing homelessness get housing, get services, and get support. We have some meaningful investments in the state. We use our document recording fees as one of the main ways to invest in counties and local governments to fund shelter, to fund supportive housing, to fund prevention efforts. We currently have a shortfall at the state in those funds. And so we, at a minimum, have to make sure that we're fully funding existing homeless services. That's how we make sure that new people don't fall into homelessness. And then we have to take more steps too. We have to ramp up the housing that we build that's affordable to extremely low-income people, especially folks who are currently experiencing homelessness. I know I'll be advocating for increased investments in things like the Housing Trust Fund. That's a proven effective way to create supportive housing for our neighbors in need.
Great. Okay, next question. Crime is a significant issue. Will you work to make it possible for property owners and police to more easily clear squatters and shut down nuisance and crime properties?
I think that's one of the questions in which we have to work with our local jurisdictions. At the state, I think a lot of what we do is more systemic in the sense of how do we alleviate the situations where we got to that spot in the first place. But I trust our local jurisdictions to kind of work in that space. I think the biggest thing is if you invest in people, a lot of these issues then become resolved as well. But I'll have you defer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think we, at the state, we need to do our best effort to get at root causes. The state is not going into specific properties and local jurisdictions to clear out problems. That is a responsibility of local government. The state needs to be sure that we're doing what we can to prevent crime in the first place and to ensure that people in the criminal legal system get whatever the help that they need to get out of the cycles that that cause recidivism and that cause people to commit crimes. That's not an easy thing. That's a multifaceted problem. That's ensuring that our prison system is providing people the kind of rehabilitative services that they need when they get out of prison to not revert to the kinds of crimes that really do impact our communities in really visible ways.
Okay. Moving on, what are you doing about Washington's workforce shortage?
We are doing so much to address the workforce shortage this year. We are planning really significant investments in our community and technical college system, which give people skills that they need in order to engage in those high-skilled professions like healthcare, like education, like manufacturing. We are adopting a lot of laws. We passed a lot of laws out of the House already this year, and I know the Senate has too, to lower barriers for people to entry professions like dental hygienist and paraeducator and mental health therapist. Those are all professions that we're seeing really severe shortages. And that doesn't mean any one of those things is going to solve those shortages by itself, but by reducing barriers for people to get into a profession like being a paraeducator or being a mental health counselor, allowing people from other states to more easily bring their credentials into Washington State. Those are some of the ways we can chip away at that workforce shortage. But this is a wide-ranging problem that if you talk to I will say any employer in any sector in our state, they would identify this as one of the biggest problem that they are facing.
Yeah, and that's in addition to having, strong labor protections, having strong provision in place for apprenticeship programs for our union partners as well, and then making sure that we are setting ourselves up for success by investing in new economies. And in my case, and Representative Fitzgibbon, ensuring that we have a green economy going forward, making sure that those investments are being made here as well.
Yeah, we know a lot of our critical workers throughout the economy need higher wages as a way to stay in the workforce and as a way to recruit and retain people. That's something we'll keep looking on. But as was mentioned, there are ways that we can improve access to jobs. I have a bill I'm excited to be working on that helps create more access for home care workers. This is something I heard about from folks in our district who are finding it hard to find home care workers to support elderly family members or children with severe disabilities. Dealing with examinations and training and licensure can help to do that. Another piece that I'm really proud that we were able to vote on the House floor is to help expand childcare access. We know that not having childcare is one of the huge barriers for people in entering the workforce. That's particularly true for women. We voted to help expand childcare access to folks in apprenticeship programs. That's a dual benefit of both increasing access to childcare, getting more folks in the trades. I think that creative thinking is really going to help make a difference.
Great. Okay, the next question is about the Climate Commitment Act. How will money from the CCA be used to support marginalized communities?
Kick it off.
Okay, so we passed the Climate Commitment Act 2 years ago, requiring the largest polluters in our state to acquire allowances from the state to cover their carbon pollution and reducing the number of allowances available over time. By requiring them to buy those allowances from the state, we bring in a lot of revenue to the state that we're going to invest in reducing emissions, fighting health disparities, and building up communities. That law requires that 35% of the dollars that the state invests go to the benefit of overburdened communities, and that 10% of those dollars go to the benefit of tribal nations. We are spending a lot of time. I know that Joe and I both in our respective chambers are working on the budgets for the Climate Commitment Act to make sure that those investments in things like reducing air quality disparities, investing in mapping of to understand where those health disparities exist the most, investing in workplace safety protections, for example, for people who work outside, like farm workers and construction workers, and are particularly exposed to impacts like heat and wildfire smoke, have more protections. Those are a few of the places that we're looking at making investments. That is just a couple of the items, but we are working really hard to ensure that 35% of those dollars, which is going to be a pretty substantial amount of money over the next 2 years, goes specifically to the benefit of the people who have historically and continue to suffer the most from environmental health disparities and from the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is Washington State's really been leading the way under Rep. Fitzgibbon's leadership and formerly Senator Carlisle and others as well. And we've done such amazing work to truly address the systemic problems as it relates to climate change and set a path forward. We put a lot of goals in place for us to decarbonize. And now we're really on that planning phase to make sure that we get there as well. And part of that are the investments that we're going to make with the Climate Commitment Act, which is part of the decarbonization strategy that we have in Washington State. And when we look at overburdened communities, there's technically ways to measure it, but there's an Environmental Justice Council that helps us make these decisions. And they're the ones that are working through these particular issues, and there's feedback associated with them in terms of the work that they're doing as well. The Department of Ecology has kind of a map in terms of overburdened communities based off of greenhouse gas emissions and otherwise as well. But that is going to be a key part of how we move forward, because that means everything from being able to subsidize heat pumps and other more fuel efficient methods of energy to being able to help reduce ratepayer impacts as it relates to whatever your utilities are as well. So there's a number of things we'll be doing in that space.
Great. Okay, so we're receiving quite a few questions about education. So our next question comes from Jane. Seattle Public Schools is facing many student-facing budget cuts because there's not enough funding from the Washington legislature. What will you do to correct that?
I think part of the problem with funding for schools is our regressive tax structure. I think folks will hear that from me, and that's the systemic issue that we currently face. It's largely from the property tax side. In the previous sessions, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a clear decision to kind of redo that framework, and it's not quite there in terms of the investments we need to make in supporting our kids. I will preface by saying that my wife is an educator in the Seattle School District. She's also in the Highland Public School Districts as well, and myself a product of those institutions. And I feel that we need to invest in our young people because they will be the future of our state. The funding for our schools is not easy. For us to be able to make these investments, obviously we have to be mindful of where they come from, and then also the impacts on ancillary stuff as it relates to special education, transportation, buses. What's interesting is one of the most contentious discussions we have this year around education is actually on the transportation side. So a lot of work's been done in terms of resetting that formula. It's not quite right, especially in the 34th where we have Vashon, which is kind of a unique spot. But I do know that we're going to make some pretty significant investments, at least from my perspective, on special education as we try to figure out some of these other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, the single biggest thing that we have heard from constituents, not just in the 34th, but across the whole state about education funding is that there's not enough special education funding for kids with special needs in our K-12 system. And we are absolutely going to be increasing funding for our districts, for our educators, for our students when it comes to special education. I cannot sit here today and tell you that we are going to increase it enough. Mm-hmm. We're always going to need to do more. But that is by far what has been identified by our communities as the place that we most need to increase the state investment in K-12. I will also say K-12 education is by far the largest expenditure that the state of Washington makes. More than 50 cents out of every tax dollar that we collect goes to our school districts to provide K-12 education. That's still not enough. We need to continue to do more there. But it is something that we take very seriously and that we've heard very clearly from parents, educators, and school districts that we need to do more on. We also want to do more, need to do more on school transportation, as Joe said. We need to do more on educator salaries, but the number one top priority for increasing funding to our K-12 schools is to increase funding for special education, including lifting the cap on the number of students that can qualify for special education funding, as well as increasing the amount of per student funding, per student who is identified as having special needs, increasing the amount of money each of those individual students brings in from the state to their school district.
Great. Okay, back to environment. One of the pressing issues in implementing the HEAL Act for environmental justice work is defining the, quote, overburdened communities that will be receiving resources. How is the legislature defining it?
I think we may have covered that in a little bit of the previous question. There's a couple of ways of doing it. The Environmental Justice Council is really leading the way on some of that work as well. The Department of Ecology has a map based off of GHG emissions. Not surprisingly, in the 34th district, the Duwamish is a Superfund site. The port's also there. The airport's also nearby. So I think we count tremendously in that space as well. But I think there's a number of ways to kind of go about defining what that looks like, and that's still being worked on.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the challenging things about the definition of overburdened communities is when the legislature passed the Healthy Environment for All Act, which is our environmental justice law 2 years ago, we didn't define overburdened community in statute. We defined it in a broad way, but left it to the individual state agencies who are covered by that law to develop an agency-specific definition. And that was really something that community groups who were advocating for that law wanted. They did not want a one-size-fits-all definition. For example, some communities suffer more from air quality burdens, some suffer more from water quality harms, some suffer more from income disparity. So it is not probably to the benefit of overburdened communities to try to fit them all into a really tight definition. So what we were trying to do is make sure that the investments we make are going to overburdened communities to whom those investments will reduce those disparities the most.
All right, next question. In the time remaining this session, what will the legislature do to promote equity and lessen the wealth gap? Will you be urging to bring the wealth tax bill for a vote?
Yeah, I'm the number 2 sponsor on the wealth tax here in the Senate, and I think our regressive tax structure is the root cause of a lot of what we're facing right now as a state. What I will say is that oftentimes complex, big bills that deal with taxes politically can be very tough to do unless we have a great, I guess, explanation in terms of how the impacts, how it's going to play out, who will be impacted, all that stuff as well. I know that we had a pretty robust conversation in our committee, in the Ways and Means Committee, because we did hear that bill. And I know that there's a lot of positive energy around it, but I will say that there's a lot of questions surrounding the implementation and the impacts associated with it as well. So the version may change and kind of what's in the bill might change, but that's a very significant part of the conversation as it relates to righting the wrongs of our tax structure. Fundamentally, I have even more, I guess, progressive ways of looking at our tax code in terms of why I think it's broken. We are waiting on a decision from the Supreme Court as it relates to capital gains and the legality of capital gains that I think might impact our decision making as well. So there's a few things kind of in the air as it relates to the tax structure as somebody who serves on the tax structure work group. So I'll be honest with you, it hasn't been received very positively. I'm not sure we'll have necessarily the ability to get a vote on it this year, but I do expect it to be a very important part of our conversation today and also going forward.
I'll say I also supported the wealth tax on the House side. Happy to find ways to create a more progressive tax system. It is regressive, it is broken. Also want to acknowledge the other part of this question, which is about how do we grow equity? Not only how do we change our tax system, but how do we build meaningful equity for folks who have been locked out of wealth? One way to do that is additional access to home ownership. We did pass out of the House, past the House floor, a Covenant Homeownership Act, which I think is a really great bill that expands access to people who have been denied access to homeownership in the past because of racially restricted covenants and redlining and historical racist practices of government to help provide new down payment assistance to get people access to homeownership. So on the one hand, we have to change our tax system and then look to continue to invest in equitable ways to increase access to wealth and stability.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely support the wealth tax as well. I do not believe at this day and age we should have billionaires in our state who are not paying their fair share to support public education, to support our social safety net, our healthcare system. I will say one of the aspects of that I don't think we've fully resolved yet is for billionaires who have kind of an army of accountants available to them to help them avoid taxes. How do we make sure that they don't just move their tax home to Sun Valley or to somewhere that doesn't have a wealth tax? We would be the first state in the nation with a wealth tax, and I think we want to be sure that we don't have outs for people to just change their tax home to one of the 49 other states and then avoid paying this tax.
And that was somebody who was on stage with Elizabeth Warren chanting 2 cents for the little tax as well. So I'm glad that we're leading on this conversation.
All right, here's a timely one. When are we going to get off daylight savings time permanently and just go to standard time?
Call the federal government, because we both voted and passed that. We just now need the federal government to do their job. So our federal partners, we love you. Please. I was wrecked yesterday.
Oh man!
Because of daylight savings time. So
it's like being jet lagged, but you're not anywhere different.
I mean, it is fun. It is fun, but not anywhere warm.
Yeah.
All right. What is your stance on the assault weapons ban?
They both voted for it, and then once it gets to the floor, I'll support it as well. Because I think, look, at the end of the day, we as a state need to take care of our community, and there are things that help and there are things that hurt, right? So gun violence is, again, we've mentioned before, one of the leading causes of deaths for our children. Being able to have a safe space and ability to ensure that that's being done thoughtfully is important. But I'm looking forward to that debate on the floor, and I intend to vote for it once it gets to the floor as well.
Yeah, one thing I'll say is when we were on the floor, and something you hear from community members is there's an entire generation of young people who have grown up doing lockdown drills and active shooter drills. I have 2 kids in the public schools. Our kids shouldn't have to go through this. this felt like a really meaningful way to vote for safety in our schools and our communities.
Yeah, I was in high school when Columbine happened, right? And, I was talking with another colleague who was also in high school when Columbine happened. And, it's the kind of thing that we wish wasn't still happening at this day and age, but it does feel kind of like coming full circle to be able to vote for something that can prevent that from happening, at least in our state in the future.
All right, back to housing. How are you ensuring the legislative dismemberment of single-family housing?
We don't edit these questions, so just so you know, this is democracy. You read them as you type
These
them.
were pre-submitted questions. And how's that going to lead to a result in affordable housing for working people?
I didn't realize we were dismembering single-family housing. I thought we were just
Creating more housing choices.
thoughtful housing
More
choices
housing
for us to
choices.
have.
Legalizing more kinds of housing.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
opposed to requiring that only single family homes be what's built in 80% of our land area.
Well, look, I was proud to both vote for and speak on the floor for 1110 Missing Middle to create more housing choices in our communities. I think it's totally reasonable to have fourplexes and triplexes in all neighborhoods so that we can have more reasonable priced homeownership and rental options. This isn't the silver bullet for affordability, but it is meaningful to create homes for teachers and firefighters and other working people. I talked about on the floor how I could not afford my home in West Seattle if I went to buy it today. I bought it over a decade ago. I couldn't buy it now. And I want people like my family, public servant, to be able to buy a home in our community. And I think that legalizing more housing choices helps us to do that. I think we also have to take complementary steps to make sure that we're creating affordability for working people, affordability for low income people. There are a lot of things we can do. I'm proud to be pushing in the capital budget for an ask to a loan acquisition program so we can secure more land, including in communities where you're seeing zoning changes. We can secure that land, build more affordable housing that's in perpetuity regulated as affordable. But that's one piece of the strategy for sure.
Yeah, and I'll take it back a little bit. We're actually neighbors. I agree, because I would not be able to afford where I live now if not for having purchased it a while ago. But I think one of the biggest things too is that we've talked about homelessness, we've talked about some structural issues within our state. Part of the problem is that we don't have access to more affordable housing because of the zoning policies that we have in place right now. So I don't think there's not a wholesale shunning of single family homes per se. It's just being able to think critically about what we can do for density, especially as it relates to transit, because that's everything from being able to provide homes, we can decarbonize, have access to transit as well. So it's a big picture problem that we're trying to solve when it comes to the housing component.
All right. Lots of states are targeting reproductive care and LGBTQ youth.
Like Texas.
What is Washington doing to protect residents here?
So I had an op-ed in the Seattle Times the other day around protecting our trans youth specifically. I saw an article from Texas the other day where they have bounties targeting LGBTQ and trans youth and people within their own communities, which is absolutely unacceptable. So for us to be a welcoming space, that's one, but also providing the access to care and the environment that's necessary. I think there's a study that suggests that around 80% of youth in the trans community have suicidal tendencies or suicidal thoughts, and 50% have tried because of the dynamics that are at play. So I think it's important for us, again, to protect our young people by giving them opportunities and access to the services and care that they need so they can be their whole selves and not feel as if they have to be ashamed because of bad policies from lawmakers in other states who don't care about them.
And in addition to the great work the Senate has done already on protecting kids seeking gender affirming care, we passed a bill out of the House to provide legal protections to people who come to Washington to access abortion, to make sure that they are not extradited, that their information is not subpoenaed by prosecutors in states who are seeking to prosecute them for having an abortion.
And I'd say the more that we're trying to advance access to gender affirming care and advance rights and for LGBTQ people in general, trans people in particular. We know that there are folks in this legislature who are trying to harm people and take rights away, and we'll fight hard to make sure that those policies never see the light of day.
All right. The next question comes from Ron on Facebook.
Also, thank you, Tara, for all the kind notes. We see you. I appreciate you.
Seniors are having to move from their homes after living there for decades because of the unrealistic increase in property taxes. What are you going to do to take some burden off of homeowners?
So we passed a bill out of the House to increase the, there's a property tax exemption for seniors and disabled veterans that it caps out at a certain level. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, but we know that exemption threshold has not kept pace with inflation, but we passed legislation out of the House to catch it up with inflation. I know that's not going to, address everybody's property taxes. Fundamentally, as a state that doesn't have a state income tax, we have to rely on sales and property and business taxes instead. And until such time as we pass the state income tax, which I think we all support, property taxes are going to probably be higher than they should.
Yeah, and there's a number of items that we've done in the past as a rest of this phase too, but it's never going to be enough in terms of the need associated with it. A lot of that also, again, it's the price of the home itself. So even if the property rates technically go down because the home values are going up so fast, that's the main component of the tax bill that you're getting. So again, being able to provide more opportunities for affordable housing, but also being mindful of ways to address kind of the implications of a property tax and ensuring that we can then help our most vulnerable communities will be important. I think it's House Bill 13, I'm just seeing on the screen, House Bill 1355, if you want to track it.
Great. Okay. What are you doing to strengthen our state's social safety net?
Yeah, so we know that everyone deserves their basic needs met. This is something you'll hear me say over and over again. I believe we are a wealthy enough state and country to meet people's basic needs. We need to both strengthen our social safety net and fix some really broken practices within the social safety net. So I'm proud to be working on 2 bills this session, actually exactly on this issue. One would make sure that folks who rely on the Aged, Blind, and Disabled program, one of our critical programs for folks with disabilities or who are elderly and can't work and need resources, that the payments that they get from the state as part of this program aren't clawed back from the state once they get on federal benefits. Similarly, have a bill 1405 where youth in the foster care system who get care from our system get their federal benefits garnished. And instead they could have a better social safety net if we made sure that they keep those benefits, working to make sure that they're able to do so. We also had some great bills that we voted off the House floor to help improve access to TANF and make sure that we have more access and stability for people on TANF. One of the big issues, cross-cutting issues in our community right now is access to food. And the federal government basically has a cliff that's cutting off access to SNAP benefits for many people across the state, including in the 34th district. We took action to bring immediate appropriations to help fund our food safety net and put groceries back in the hands of people. But we'll need to make sure we keep raising revenue and keeping a focus on funding our basic needs programs.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, why didn't the ranked choice voting bill proceed through the legislature? What is the future for RCV in Washington?
Sure, yeah, so I was a co-sponsor of the legislation this year would have implemented a ranked choice voting system for the presidential primary in Washington state, which is a good kind of step forward for ranked choice voting to see if it worked, because it, that's on a separate ballot, and so it would require less administrative costs than trying to do ranked choice voting for some races and not others, which is what would happen if you did it on just the regular general or the regular primary election ballot. We were not quite able to persuade the chair of the state government committee that was a good idea at this time, and so we're not able to get that bill heard and moved out of the committee. But I do know that because Seattle voters have voted to implement ranked choice voting in Seattle city elections, we're going to have that chance to see how that works. Is that a successful system, and is that the kind of thing that we could expand to encompass some state or federal races?
Yeah, I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in Seattle because we were able to pass that program. I was a supporter of that as well. So hopefully that gives us enough data to suggest that Washington State should be taking this on as well.
All right. What are you doing to fully fund special education services? I'm going to take a moment to say anybody who's watching, you can answer or ask a question by just writing it in the chat. We'll go back to the special education question.
Both the House and the Senate have passed bills to increase funding for special education. They are not exactly the same. We are going to be working to reconcile them all the way until the end of session. I will say there is no disagreement, probably by anybody in the legislature, that we need to increase funding for special education. Some of our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle are not supportive of the revenue that we need in order to fund it at the level that our constituents are asking for. We will absolutely be increasing funding for special education services as much as we can, and we will probably still have to come back in future sessions and do more.
I think it's fair to add that there are a lot of Republicans who also don't want to fund the adjacent investments that make sure that kids have the stability that they need to show up and learn, including kids who are in special education. I mean, we have homeless students, 40,000 homeless students across the state of Washington. We have to make sure that they have homes and they have the supports that they need. So a lot of this is those anti-poverty investments that are complementary to investing in our school system so that we have kids who are stable and ready to learn.
All right. The next question is for Rep. Fitzgibbon. How has your role changed now that you are the majority leader?
Is it more fun?
Is
Is it more fun or is it less fun than being chair?
It's different. I was chair of the House Environment and Energy Committee for 9 years, in which, I moved on just as Joe became chair of the Senate and Energy, Environment, and Telecommunications Committee. So we were ships in the night. We missed each other in those roles. But I got to do a lot when I was in that role of doing the really deep dives on policies that I cared about and fighting climate change, addressing environmental justice, fighting toxic pollution. And sometimes you get to do a deep dive on a bill that maybe you didn't know that you cared about because it mattered to another member who brought it forward, and you as the committee chair are in the driver's seat of trying to make sure that you get it right and that you get the bill passed. So now Joe gets to do that, and I, instead of doing the deep dives on environment and energy issues, I'm working on like a million different things at not the same depth. The thing I spend the most of my time on right now is developing the House proposal for the operating budget, which is a big job. I am just one of many people on that team, but that is a big part of how I spend my time now. I spend a lot of time when a priority for one of our legislative colleagues or a priority for the House Democratic Caucus runs into a problem. I try to go help figure out how to resolve the problem. A lot of that is communication with my colleagues in the Senate. Some of it is communication with our colleagues, the House Republicans, or communication with the governor and his office. So I feel like I spend a lot more time doing a lot of different things than in my old role, where I got to really focus in on a couple things.
Okay. What is your stance on changing the law to eliminate the ability to perform a right turn at a red light? What is the status of this change as it makes its way through the legislature?
Well, I think the bills are dead in both the House and Senate. I did co-sponsor the bill to prohibit right on red, in part because I think that our streets are way too oriented towards cars. And I think that if we had streets where cars went slower, where we made investments in our pedestrian infrastructure and our bike infrastructure, that people would be more safe. We have record levels of people dying on our streets, being hit and killed by cars. I think it's unacceptable. And we have to take steps. Maybe this wasn't the right bill at the right time, but there are other things that we should be doing. I know that I've been pushing for investments in our transportation budget to really focus on some pedestrian infrastructure investments in some high traffic areas across the 34th district. I sponsored legislation to eliminate jaywalking laws because I actually believe that the more people and the more we're orienting our streets towards people, the slower that cars will go. And so a lot of work there to make sure that we really reach the vision and the goal, which should be that there are no pedestrian fatalities. And I'll keep working on that issue for sure.
All right. Given the recent collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Silvergate, what do you plan to do to protect the Washington State pension plans from experiencing similar crashes in value, since the funds now invest close to 30% in high risk private equity deals?
Are you on the pension?
I am on the pension committee, although we don't deal with the investment side. That's the state investment board. I will say that Washington State's pension plans have a very strong track record of delivering both high and stable investment returns. And one of the reasons for that is that we avoid the legislature micromanaging that money. And it is probably not in the interest of public employee retirees who are counting on a stable and secure retirement to have the legislature substituting our political judgment for the judgment of the professionals at the state investment board.
Yeah, and I will say, just for those particular situations, there was some mismanagement in terms of how they handle their treasury funds, which are kind of unique to those particular institutions, so not necessarily systemic to all investments that are out there.
All right. This comes from Randy on Facebook. How will you help prioritize state funding for heat pumps in middle and low income housing?
It is great that we have so many Climate Commitment Act dollars to invest.
Randy does a lot of work in that space.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have the ability to make historic investments in heat pumps, which are the most efficient, the least emitting, and also provide really good adaptation benefits, because, as you know, I grew up in Seattle. I didn't ever have air conditioning until I got a heat pump. This was the first summer that I had a heat pump for, and I will tell you, it was great, because in contrast to the previous summer when it was 108 degrees and over 700 Washingtonians died of heat death, tragic deaths due to 108 degree heat that summer. Having heat pumps is one of the ways that we can help people both lower their energy bills, reduce their emissions, and have the ability to get out of the heat when we experience those more frequent and more severe heat events.
And it sounds like a great way to spend Climate Commitment Act dollars to ensure that we're doing it equitably and decarbonizing at the same time.
Great. As a lead law enforcement assisted diversion project member serving White Center in Burien, I support my city hall partners. Can more shelters be implanted in these areas?
I think we would all love to see that. I think our job is basically to make sure that the resources exist, as Emily was describing earlier, that the local government and nonprofit partners who build and administer those facilities have the resources from the state they need to do that.
Yeah. And what I would say is that oftentimes the reason why some of those facilities can become contentious is that there's a history of not necessarily engaging communities in the most thoughtful way as they get put in and done in partnership with folks who are going to be in that space. There are ways to do it that way. We can bring in the community as well. And I think that's how we have successful implementation of these much needed services across jurisdictions, including in areas that are not necessarily just in South King County as well, because we see this need everywhere.
And I got to say, we have some really great jurisdictions. I know there are community partners who are bringing us projects for new shelter facilities in the 34th district. And it's our job to work hard to make sure that the resources are there so this can be built and we can support families and individuals in need.
Great. All right. I think this is going to be our last question, and then we'll do some closing remarks. Legislative reports have documented, and the pandemic sadly illustrated how underfunded the governmental public health system is. The legislature is making steady progress in changing this by investing in the system's core services called foundational public health services. Do you support increasing that funding in the biennial budget to bring this closer to the estimated amount needed?
Yes, I expect that you will see really substantial investments in foundational public health in our budget this year. I will say that our public health agencies have been sounding the alarm on this since long before COVID. And there's nothing like a global pandemic to make you appreciate the value of having well-resourced public health officials. We have seen that, of course, in COVID, but also in other instances like the measles outbreak just a few years prior. We know how important public health is to deal with extreme weather events like wildfire smoke. So I think that we, both our constituents and our legislative colleagues, understand the importance of public health at a level that is far deeper than we've seen ever before.
All right. Well, as we wrap things up, I'll turn it over to all three of you for any closing remarks you'd like to share.
You want to go first?
Sure. Well, thank you all so much for your great questions. Thanks for this time. Hopefully it's the first of many opportunities to engage. We've already made some real progress in Olympia, and I know we have so much work to do. I know personally there's still a lot more work to do around housing, an issue that I'm passionate about. I know many community members care about. Disappointing to see a lack of action around tenant protections, several bills that I supported to help provide modest regulations for the many tenants across the district and the state. We still have work to do there, have work to do to make sure that there are the resources necessary to help provide more affordable homes, more work to do to make sure that we are taking action on the workforce, we're taking action to support nurses and to support a strong healthcare system. So look forward to all of that. I do want to say that one of the best parts of being a representative has been engaging with community and engaging with all of you. Just the other day talking to students and parents and teachers on Vashon about your needs for the school district, talking to folks who were passionate about making sure that there's insurance coverage for hearing aids. I was proud to vote on that bill. The little things that matter, the big things that matter to folks in the district. So please keep reaching out. Can't wait to hear more about what you're following, what you're passionate about, and hope to keep making progress for our district.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback. There's a lot of good work that's being done. And honestly, during this time of session too, oftentimes good things that even we want may not have passed. Everything from rent stabilization to some of the other big policies that are kind of out there as well. But one thing that you can count on from us is that we'll stay engaged. We'll be in touch. We're willing to have those tough conversations. We're very fortunate to be able to serve in the 34th district, which tends to be a more aggressive, progressive area. So I think at least it aligns with some of the values that we have here as well. But part of that responsibility includes pushing the conversation on potentially tough issues. And it's an honor to be able to serve with two great legislators within this district as well. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Our contact info will be there, and I'd be happy to answer more questions as well.
It's just a great privilege to get to represent this community in the state legislature. And, I know that we all appreciate the trust that you have placed in us to do this work. We've really only scratched the surface tonight of the many things that we are trying to get done this year. And for every victory that we are able to excitedly tell you about here tonight, we know that there's other things that haven't yet made it over the finish line that we're going to keep working on in the years to come. I know I was really excited about a big reform to our state's recycling system that would have made it way more friendly to just ordinary people in Washington state and less tilted towards the big waste haulers. But that didn't make it over the finish line this year. I will say that, one of the things I've learned from, couple decades of work on climate change is every time that we come up short on something that we feel passionately about, we learn some things that we are going to bring to bear the next time and the next time until we ultimately get it over the finish line. And that's true with a lot of the things that we've talked about tonight, like reforming our broken tax structure. And we just really appreciate the trust that you've placed in us to continue working on these hard issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, 34.
Thank you so much.
All right, so if we didn't get to your question tonight, you can reach out to your lawmakers directly. Their info will be on the screen here in a moment. These videos will live on the platforms that you are watching them on, and we hope you have a great night.